Hello guys, welcome to Redditor's Revenge. Here we post amazing revenge stories daily. And if you want more content like this, please do subscribe to the channel and stay tuned with us. Moving on to our today's story. Like all people, I 20 had quite the handful of a grandma. She lived close to us, yet we rarely ever visited. She was my grandmother from my mom's side, and it was so clear that my mom had her fair share of issues with her that stemmed back to my mom's childhood. She used to tell us that Grandma was very cruel, tough, and even abusive to her as a child. She told about how she used to beat her if she did something wrong, and constantly berated her for every little mistake. This made my mother grow up resenting her mother, and so she wanted nothing to do with her for the longest time. When we were children, we only visited her on holidays, and the only reason for that was to have some sense of family, as my uncle, my mom's brother, wanted so. He was the older of the two, and he cared about having their family together as much as possible since his dad, my grandpa, had passed away a long time ago. Still, my mom wanted my grandma to have no effect on me and my little sister and the way we were raised. On the occasional visits, though, things were always very tough. I never harbored any bad feelings for her, but she did embarrass me a lot. One time, when I was 6 years old, because I was a chubby kid, she made fun of me for being fat and kept bringing it up to the point where my mom told her to stop, and she thought she was just joking around. I remember that day I came home in tears and wouldn't eat for a couple of days, and ever since then I've developed a kind of eating disorder, and I've been skinny ever since. This was just the tip of the iceberg. If I had told her I got a bad grade or that I wasn't one of the tops at school, she would go nuts and ask me why and make a whole deal out of it. I didn't know why she was so extreme about this, since she didn't have a job and was a stay-at-home mom her entire life. She would always talk about my cousins and how they were doing so well at school, and on the other hand, when she met my cousins, she would tell them that my sister and I were better at something. She just wanted to do anything that would make people uncomfortable and stir up unnecessary drama to make things worse around holidays. This extreme competition was because my uncle was her favorite son, unlike my mom, so she did prefer my cousins over me and my sister and always treated them better. When it came to my sister, though, she was unruly. My sister is 12 years old, so she's not even old enough to realize what's being told to her, but she gets so nosy with her and her life that it's unbearable. She always tries to put herself down for the way she looks or her hair or her clothes, and just gives her so much insecurity over absolutely nothing. This got to the point where my mom yelled at her hard once during a holiday dinner, and it became a massive family fight where she told her that she hated her and that she never wanted to see her again, and stormed off with me and my sister. It took me some time to realize what had happened, but ever since then my mom barely spoke to her and always told us never to listen to what she said. The one person who didn't have much of a problem with her was my uncle, her son. Because he was the favorite son, she did everything for him and he never had any problems. She never insulted him or his family and always put him on such a pedestal that clearly made my mom angry and uncomfortable, and this drove a wedge between their relationship as brother and sister a long time ago. I tried talking to him about her once, and he told me that she was just a very old woman from a different time who suffered a lot and never meant a word she said. He told me that her father, my uncle's grandpa, was a very tough military man who treated her very coldly, and that's why she grew up like this. To some extent, I sympathized, but not to the point where I'd actively seek out a conversation with her, or even try to enjoy any minute with her. He did tell me that if she ever did or said anything to me or my sister, he would tell her off. It was supposed to be the next family dinner, and everyone gathered looking very uncomfortable and upset. Nobody in the family liked the big gatherings, and I couldn't blame them, so we were all just sitting there waiting for the time to pass. My grandma was of course sprouting her usual nonsense and nosiness, making fun of whoever fell under the barrel of her gun, or asking extremely uncomfortable questions to everyone. We just decided to stay quiet and not talk back to her this time, as it would have been over soon. Suddenly, though, she collapsed on the floor, and even though it took everyone a moment to react, we took her to the hospital. She spent a couple of days at the hospital after having a stroke, and we found out that she had a bunch of medical issues that needed immediate attention. Because she always wanted to have this tough attitude, she rarely mentioned having any pain or issues, but it seemed like there were a lot of them. She got really tired. Surprisingly, though, she asked to see me and my sister first before anyone else. When we entered, we saw her very frail and weak, unlike any time we had seen her before. She seemed so different, even in the way she talked. She told us that she was sorry if she ever made us feel embarrassed or bad, and that she never realized how hurtful things could be until she had this brush with death. She told us that at the moment of the stroke, she saw her life flashing before her eyes, and she didn't like it. She told us that she had this epiphany and that she didn't want to be so hurtful anymore. She kept apologizing to us and it did seem genuine, even though it was so unexpected. We told her that we forgive her and that everything was fine, and she seemed very glad. After we left, my mom entered, and when she went out she had tears in her eyes. She told us that Grandma told her the same thing, and that she had never seen her so genuine and so broken before. It seemed like she was genuinely shocked at this and was glad that she could have a nice moment with her mother. 2 days later, the doctor told us that when she leaves the hospital, she couldn't stay alone at all. He told us that someone must stay with her to make sure she was fine and to give her medication and clear after her. He told us that the stroke affected her brain and that she had early signs of dementia, so her judgment of things may be very inaccurate and she might forget things or remember them incorrectly. He told us that her movement will be extremely slow and frail and that she might even need help going to the bathroom and eating. My uncle was willing to do it, but she swore that she wouldn't stay with him. My mom seemed extremely hesitant, but when she caved and agreed, my grandma also refused and told us that she didn't want to stay with either of them. After that nice moment they had a couple of days before, it seemed like Grandma was back to her old self with that stubbornness and unwillingness to stay with my mom. My mom was frustrated again and didn't offer a second time. Eventually, they agreed to get a stay-at-home nurse who would stay with her the whole time, give her the medicine, and take care of her. My uncle found one who was even studying to be a doctor, and we thought it would be a nice opportunity for her to help my grandma and study a bit at the house. Things were quiet at the beginning of the nurse's stay with my grandma. We didn't hear much from her, so we just assumed that everything was fine. My uncle visited her a couple of times a month and he told us that things were going great and that the nurse was very nice. My mom stopped caring after Grandma's adamance on not wanting to stay with her, so she never visited her and just simply did not care what happened to her. She saw her illness as a way for her to get out of our lives, which was somewhat disturbing, but I couldn't blame her. One day, though, we got a call from my grandma. My mom was in the bathroom, so I picked up, and my grandma's voice was very, very strange. She had this muffled voice, like someone who was sick or crying. She told me that she needed to speak with my mom, and when I told her that Mom was in the bathroom, she asked me to tell her to call her immediately. I asked her if anything was wrong, and she told me, "You need to get me away from that damn nurse," and then the phone instantly hung up. It was strange, and when I told my mom, she didn't care and told me that she was probably making the nurse's life a living hell, as she did theirs. Our uncle came to visit us a few days later and he asked us if Grandma called us to talk about the nurse. When we asked why, he told us that she called him and told him that the nurse was treating her badly. We argued with him that she was probably lying like she always did, and eventually he got convinced and told us probably. He still wanted my mom to visit her, though, as he was traveling the following day. So, against her wishes, we went to visit her and we got a strange vibe immediately. The house was clean and everything, and my grandma was sitting in her chair watching TV and barely moving a muscle. She looked thin, frail, and weak. As soon as she saw us, she gave us this half smile and kept looking around to wait for the nurse to get out. As soon as she left the room, she immediately told us to save her from the nurse. She told us that the nurse was treating her violently, insulting her, and even beating her sometimes. We thought it was either lying or her dementia speaking, so we didn't believe her. She kept insisting, so we sat down with the nurse before we left and asked her what was going on. She told us that she didn't do anything to her, on the contrary. She told us that Grandma was the one who treats her badly and constantly insults her and calls her bad names. She told us that on the first day of the job, she went to bed crying from the embarrassment she felt. We thought that this was in line with what Grandma usually did, so we just apologized to her and told her about Grandma's brain condition. We ignored Grandma's other warnings from now on. Every other day, my uncle would call her to check up on her and she would complain about the nurse. She told him that the nurse was beating her if she didn't take her medicine, and that strange people come to the house at night. Again, he didn't believe her and we just let her be. My uncle made my mom in charge of the house's money, though. He would send my mom money so that she would give it to the nurse to buy groceries and medicine and the like. My mom gave her a ton of money that should be enough for the whole month. A couple of weeks later, though, my mom got a call from the nurse telling her that they ran out of money. I heard my mom yelling on the phone that the money was more than enough, but the nurse kept telling her that it was finished. This happened 3 more times over the course of 3 months, and by the 3rd time, my mom had had enough and went over to the house to have a talk with the nurse. She asked her where all the money was going, and she told her that it was for food for my grandma. It didn't line up, though, as my grandma was stick thin. Before my mom left, my grandma asked me to see her in her room alone. I didn't get why, but while my mom was arguing with the nurse, I went to see my grandma. She told me that I'll be the only one who believed her, because I was honest and didn't hate her so much like my mom. She told me that the nurse was beating her, stealing money, and leaving her bruised. She even showed me some of the bruises on her back. She kept going, telling me that when she was in bed, she heard strange men in the house and the sounds of laughter and moaning. She begged me to believe her and to get her away from the nurse. When I went home with my mom, I told her the whole thing and she was still skeptical. She called the nurse to tell her about all the allegations, and the nurse told her that it was all my grandma's imagination. She said the bruises came from her falling off her bed a couple of days before, and that the sounds were coming from the TV downstairs. My mom believed the nurse immediately, but I kept telling her that something was up. I called my uncle to tell him about the whole thing, and he was the one who believed me and was about to go over to the nurse when he suddenly got a call that my grandma was taken to the hospital again. The next day at the hospital, my grandma passed away. The doctor told us it was due to not taking her medication on time and lack of care. She had developed blood poisoning, and they found a bunch of bed sore ulcers on her body, which meant that she spent an overly long time in bed without being showered. We knew immediately that the nurse didn't take care of her well enough, and this was why she died. After the funeral, we started investigating the nurse and grandma's allegations. She again kept denying everything because it got to a heated exchange outside the house. It was me, my mom, and my uncle. While we were leaving, though, the next-door neighbors called us inside to talk to us. They gave us their condolences first and began to discuss what they knew. They told us that they heard my grandma screaming a lot from the window, and they heard the nurse yelling at her on a daily basis. They were concerned about what was happening, but didn't want to intervene. They told us the yelling got worse day by day, and at night, they saw men entering the house and heard uncomfortable noises all night. We all felt terrible for not having believed her at first, and my uncle was furious and wanted to take out his anger on the nurse. The problem was that the nurse had taken her money and left, and she wasn't returning any calls. We went through the house thoroughly though, and we found some of my grandma's jewelry missing. My uncle went nuts and promised that he would destroy the nurse. We went straight to the police station and pressed charges. We even had the hospital's testimony that grandma might have died due to lack of care. The nurse didn't give her medication on time, and this messed her up. We kept following the case until the nurse was arrested and spent 2 nights in jail before going straight to court. The police searched her place and found my grandma's jewelry, but we still had no idea where all the money she took each month was going. All of us testified against her in court, including the next-door neighbors who said everything they used to hear. The part about the strange men coming in and out was especially noteworthy. After the investigation, she got 24 months of prison time for endangerment, theft, and prostitution. After the 2 years were up, though, we weren't through with her yet. We reported her to the medical school she was studying at, and she automatically lost her license and couldn't become a doctor anymore. The thing is, she put a lot of money into this, and she came begging us because she was in debt. She told us that she did her time and served her penance in prison, but my uncle was not having it. He told her that he will see her on the floor broken. What we didn't know, though, was that my mom filed a lawsuit against her that was finally getting somewhere. The nurse had to get a lawyer and everything, so she was losing even more money. The lawsuit lasted around a year, and she lost every penny trying to fight it. This was the money we presumed she stole from Grandma. Her final court hearing was an absolute delight. The most ironic part of the lawsuit was that my cousin was the one who was representing us against her. He was a very good lawyer, so Grandma had good reason to always be proud of him over us. He ripped her apart at court, and she went down on her knees, broken and in tears, and admitted to everything. We won the lawsuit, and we didn't care what happened to her next. It's ironic how revenge can come in double sometimes. The nurse herself was my grandma's penance for how she acted her entire life, and then the nurse faced her penance for treating my grandma horribly. Now, this concludes our video for today. I know today's story is sad, but I hope you enjoyed the vengeance on that horrible nurse. So, before you leave, share your thoughts about the horrible nurse, or do you believe Opus's mother made a mistake by not listening to her mother in the comments section? Also, please like and subscribe to the channel to keep up with us for more revenge stories.